With people behaving like pigs, I felt the Jews were being destroyed. I had to help them. There was no choice. Oskar Schindler was an ordinary man, thrust into an extraordinary situation. Given the chance to profit greatly from his privileged position during the war, he decided instead to risk his life and reputation countless times in order to protect the Jewish workers employed in his factory. Yet Schindler was far from an innocent bystander. He was an alcoholic, known for his extramarital affairs, and a war profiteer who spied for the Nazi Party in Czechoslovakia. Ironically, these qualities were quite likely responsible for earning him the trust of high-level party members and facilitating his virtuous actions. The permanent exhibit at the site of his former factory chronicles life in Krakow during the time of the Nazi occupation and puts context to Schindler's transformation from exploiter to savior. Power is when you have every justification to kill someone, and then you don't. Poland after World War I was enjoying its newfound independence after 123 years of being divided between three occupying powers: Russia, Germany, and Austria-Hungary. The country rebuilt itself and achieved impressive economic growth. Everything changed on September 1st, 1939, when the Nazis invaded. Krakow became the capital of the general government of the Nazi-controlled Polish territory. The quality of life in Krakow progressively decayed as the Nazis closed down the city's schools, arrested professors, gained control of the press, and executed those resisting or providing assistance to the Jews. Many Polish and Jewish businesses were forced closed, their property and assets appropriated and passed to German owners. It was during this period that Schindler came to the city, acquiring a bankrupt Enamel kitchenware factory. Using his flair for flattery and bribery, he secured plentiful Nazi army contracts for his pots and pans. He hired around 1,000 Jews to work in his factory, encouraged by the low wages set by Nazi authorities for Jewish workers. If you saw a dog going to be crushed under a car, wouldn't you help him? As the capital of the Nazis' operations in the region, Krakow had to be cleansed of its over 60,000 Jewish citizens. To this end, the Nazis expelled the majority into surrounding towns and villages, and sequestered the remaining to the ghetto, which was officially established on March 3, 1941. A wall, whose arches ominously resembled tombstones, was constructed along the border of the ghetto. Windows and doors facing the Aryan side were bricked up so as to completely isolate the Jews from the outside world. 15,000 Jews were crammed into an area which previously housed only 3,000. In many cases, 4 families had to share the same apartment, which often was in disrepair. Life in the ghetto worsened drastically as the years went on. Rations were periodically reduced, eventually reaching 100 grams of bread a day and 200 grams of sugar or fat a month. Under penalty of death, Jews and Poles from the outside smuggled food into the ghetto. Often, these stolen rations were the only thing keeping those inside the ghetto alive. I knew the people who worked for me. When you know people, you have to behave towards them like human beings. As the Nazis grew more ruthless in their treatment of the Jews, so Schindler became craftier. Initially, Jews in the ghetto who carried working papers were spared from deportation to concentration camps, such as Auschwitz. Soon, however, only those whose work contributed directly to the Third Reich's war effort were protected. To ensure his workers would not live in constant fear of sudden deportation, Schindler established a munitions department in his factory, which provided mess hall tins, bullet cartridge cases, and fuses for artillery shells. He forged his employee registry. Schindler recorded children and the elderly as of working age. Likewise, lawyers, doctors, and artists were registered as mechanics and laborers, thereby less likely to be taken away. Often, Schindler would have to bribe SS officers to prevent them from investigating too deeply into his affairs. His extensive contacts, acquired during his work as a spy in Czechoslovakia, helped him acquire black market goods, such as gifts for bribes and food for his workers. His fortune quickly dwindled. Beyond this day, no thinking person could fail to see what would happen. I was now resolved to do everything in my power to defeat the system. The Nazis consolidated the Krakow ghetto in multiple waves. Each time, they sent a portion of the able-bodied population to work in concentration camps and eliminated those deemed too weak. On March 14, 1943, the ghetto was liquidated. Over 8,000 were transported to camps, and 2,000 others were shot in the streets and abandoned. Thanks to his connections, Schindler knew about the closure ahead of time and allowed his workers to stay in the factory overnight. A new concentration camp known as Płaszów was opened to accommodate all the Jews from the ghetto. The commandant of the camp, Amon Guth, would randomly torture and shoot inmates. According to one prisoner, the first impression was terrifying. Schindler obtained permission from Guth, after some bribery, to build a subcamp under his personal control in which to house his workers. The camp, complete with barbed wire fences, also took in 450 other Jewish workers from nearby factories. Now you are finally with me. You are safe now. Don't be afraid of anything. You don't have to worry anymore. By October of 1944, the Soviet army was pushing back the Nazis from the east. At the same time, Polish resistance forces under Operation Burza, or Storm, were revolting in Nazi-occupied territories around the country. Krakow would soon have to be abandoned. Płaszów was closed, and its inmates were shipped to Auschwitz to await extermination in the gas chambers. Schindler convinced officials to let him move his factory to Brunlitz, Czechoslovakia. Amon Guth's secretary, Miętek Pemper, crafted the list of 1,200 Jews who would be taken to the new factory. Along the way, 300 women who were on the list were rerouted to Auschwitz. Schindler fought for their return, eventually sending his secretary, laden with diamonds and other gifts, to secure the return. The women, who had been on their way to the gas chambers, were reclothed and loaded back onto a train. This was the only time anyone had ever been sent out of the camp. Schindler's factory in Brunlitz was tasked with producing shell casings for bullets. Not one usable shell was produced. They all failed quality control tests. Despite this, Schindler continued to operate his factory without interference from the Nazis, and even petitioned for more workers to be sent to him so he could expand production. I hated the brutality, the sadism, and the insanity of Nazism. I just couldn't stand by and see people destroyed. I did what I could, what I had to do, what my conscience told me I must do. By the end of World War II, Schindler had spent an estimated $1 million on bribes and black market purchases of supplies and food for his workers. He was practically broke and unwelcome in Germany. He was stripped of his German nationality and received threats for assisting the Jews as well as testifying in court against Nazi war criminals. Fearing arrest by the Soviets due to his affiliation with the Nazi Party, he and his wife left for Argentina. There he pursued a number of unsuccessful business ventures, eventually becoming bankrupt and returning alone to Europe. The Jews he had helped, known as the Schindlerjuden, did not forget him. Many Jewish organizations assisted him financially. This was one of his main forms of subsistence after the war. In 1961, Schindler was invited to Israel for the first time. There, he received a warm welcome from the families of those he had saved. He was buried in Jerusalem after his death. One need not save thousands to be a hero, nor have their exploits immortalized by movies, medals, or memorials. During the war, there were many heroes who risked their lives hiding Jews in their homes, smuggling supplies into the ghetto, and collaborating against the Nazi occupiers. Others incentivized by material reward, denounced neighbors and acquaintances who were suspected of aiding the resistance. In an inconceivable environment in which the norm was murder and destruction, some partake or stand by, and others fight back. What would we do?